All right. Now I know you're here, Ellen,
Yes,
as one
Maria.
side, but then I was going to say, let's go ahead and put our Maria hat on. Welcome.
And I have to say, I really, I just noticed how messy the top shelf is. So you got me, warts and all.
Oh my
So
goodness. So I think it looks great. It means that you've got like your journals back there with all of your ideas, I imagine.
well, no, actually, it's my date books, and I haven't figured out where to put them. So, but they actually do serve as journals too, kind of, because I just
Mhm.
write down whatever I can in them.
Yeah. Do you keep them? Are they like from past years? Do you keep them always, or do you
Yes,
get
I
rid of
don't.
them?
I just feel weird unloading them. I mean, I should probably donate them, but who knows? So,
No,
I
I
mean,
love that.
donate them or recycle them, but it's like it's painful to do that.
I understand. I'm the same way. I have like one of those like IKEA cube boxes
Yeah.
behind me, and my I have a bookshelf back here that's hiding behind your book. Um, and it's full of all my journals and stuff because I'll buy
Yeah.
them at Costco and then I just
Oh, yeah.
go through them within a year. I get three, go through it in a year, and I put them there. And I'm like, well, one day I might want this, but
Yes, exactly.
yeah, they're my friends. I understand. Well, Maria, thank you so much for joining
Sure.
us tonight. We're so excited. I'd love it if you don't mind, Maria, just taking a few minutes, introduce yourself to our listeners and readers, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started writing.
Yes. Okay. So, I actually, my other professional name is Ellen Byron, and I started actually as a playwright. I was doing some acting, and then I decided to transition into writing plays. And I
Cool.
wrote plays, and they were published and produced, but it was a slog. And I supported myself doing magazine work, interviewing mostly celebrities. It became kind of my beat.
Mhm.
Freelance. And then I kind of decided I needed to have a steadier income if I could break in, because it's not easy, but knock wood, I did manage to break into television. So I wrote for television, for almost 25 years,
Wow.
off and on. And the shows you would know me from were Wings and Just Shoot Me, Still Standing, Fairly
Oh
Odd Parents.
my God.
Yes.
Ah.
Yeah, and then I did a lot of shows that didn't last, that lasted a season, if that, and pilots. And I wrote most of that with a writing partner, not all of it. So,
Mhm.
so then, in TV, there are ups and downs, and it's like
Yeah.
a game of staffing season every year is like a game of musical chairs, and you either get a seat, at the writers' table or you don't. And in about 2011, I did not have a seat, so I was a little burnt out anyway. So I decided to try. I loved reading mysteries. And I tried once before, about 10 years earlier, when the writer we had, my writing partner and I had some issues with we learned had backstabbed us for another job. So I wanted to kill him.
Good.
So I tried writing a mystery, but it wasn't very good. So I thought, well, I can't really do this. But then 2011 rolled around. I was like, I'm going to try again because I like reading it. I'm going to challenge myself.
Mm.
And I wrote something. It was called at the time Reality Checked, although I've ended up changing the name to You Can Never Be Too Thin or Too Dead. And it actually won a grant for unpublished writers from William F. Deek Malice Domestic Grant. Malice
Mhm.
Domestic is a convention that happens every year in Maryland, and it covers, it's primarily for traditional and cozy authors, cozy falling under the purview of traditional. And so that kind of kicked off my mystery writing career. And that book didn't sell, but while it was out on submission, I wrote, my husband and I had stayed in the late 90s. We spent a night at a plantation outside New Orleans in Cajun
Mm.
Country. And I went to school at Tulane, so I had a lot of familiarity with Cajun Country in New Orleans. In fact, our daughter in May just graduated from Loyola, right next door, Loyola, New Orleans. So,
Congratulations.
but it was a very strange thing staying at Maidwood because the people who owned it weren't there. So it's kind of like a no host thing. So it was
Mm.
like you and some strangers trying to socialize. It felt very much like, like Agatha Christie, and then there were none. So I
Mhm.
think that stayed in the back of my head. And when I started to write another mystery, I thought, gosh, it'd be really cool that would be a great setting. Sorry, I'm playing with my hair.
No, it's okay.
That would be a great setting for a mystery. And then when I was writing it, I started making myself hungry. And I'm not really a cook. But I thought, well, if I make myself hungry, readers are going to get hungry. And so maybe I should throw out some recipes, which has proven to be sometimes the hardest part of my books. So I'm going to launch a new series next year, and technically it doesn't have to have recipes, which is a huge relief. But I also think, oh no, are people going to be expecting recipes? So I may have to throw one in just so it's there.
Exactly. Or maybe it's like a little bonus for your newsletter
Yeah. Oh,
subscribers or
that's a good
readers,
idea.
you know?
Yes. Sign up for my newsletter and get cowboy casserole. It's actually
Mhm.
going to be set in the foot of Gold Rush Country in California. And
Oh,
they're
very
called the
cool.
Golden Motel Mysteries. And it's kind of Hacks meets Schitt's Creek, because
Mm.
it's a burned out Sikkim writer. Who would that be? Who buys a mid-century motel that's at the foot of Gold Rush Country and shares a border with a national park,
Yes.
Yosemite, maybe under another
Mm.
name.
Mhm.
So that's going to be really fun, but that's next year.
Oh my
So
gosh.
anyway, so then I started writing, so the Cajun Country Mysteries took off. And then I also write the Vintage Cookbook Mysteries. And then as Maria DiRico, I started writing the Catering Hall Mysteries, which are inspired by my own life, because my mom is Italian. And growing up, we had two cousins who ran different catering halls in Queens. And so my character works at one of them, and it's where my husband and I had our New York reception.
Mhm.
And she lives where my nonna actually lived. I mean, so it's a very personal series to me.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
So,
So did you have any concerns with making something so personal and like maybe your friends and family from then, like kind of
I've heard from first of all, my relatives seem to be pretty proud of me. They
good?
seem to kind of like it.
I love that.
And I don't know how many of them actually read it. One cousin did, and actually her father was one of the people who ran the catering hall, where we had our wedding reception, or second, our New York reception. And thank God she loved it. And she also informed me, people, well, there's a mob angle. My protagonist is Mia Karina, and her father, Ravello, who runs it, is trying to like extricate himself. And so they're running it as a legitimate business. It was acquired as a payment for a gambling debt, an illegal
Mm.
gambling game. But they're running it as a legitimate business, because the mob really it doesn't just have illegal business, it also has legitimate businesses. So actually what was interesting is my cousin and informed me that, not her father, but some of the other people involved were involved with, other people running, so it wasn't, people go, well, it's Italian, it's a mob. And I'm like, well, actually, it happens to be based partially on truth, not in this particular case, but in some cases. And what's interesting from my life is that my mom was born in Italy and came over when she was young, but my dad's family is Jewish, and my grandfather on the Jewish side actually disappeared, was low-level mob, and disappeared in 1933. So I like to tell people that I mobbed up on two sides, so you really better be nice to me.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
recommend buying my books. You know what's good for you. No, I'm kidding.
Exactly. You'd be sleeping with the fishes.
Yes, exactly.
Which is so funny because I have a question in here that was like, I read about your grandpa being a low-level mobster, and now I need to know more about this. How
Yeah,
did
well,
you find out?
it was never, it was never a secret. But it's interesting. Like the Italians have a very different, because I can speak to both cultures. The Italians have a very different attitude towards, the mob than the Jewish side does.
Mhm.
And the Jewish, there are books, there was a period in time when, in the late 20s and early 30s, when the two really very much worked together. And I did a little research, and what I discovered, I read a book called Tough Jews, and they talked about this candy store in Brownsville, Brooklyn. And I looked at a census, and it turned out that growing up, my grandfather lived walking distance from this candy store. And I believe, and he ended up at some point when he went to jail, he embezzled from, I think, Chase Manhattan Bank. He was jailed for a while. And then also was interesting is when he disappeared for some strange reason, which I've never been able to figure out. They were living up in the Boston area, which has no connection to my family at all. And I wonder, I got a book, a biography of Meyer Lansky, who was one of the most people most involved with Murder Incorporated. And they were in the late 20s, early 30s. At one point, he was up in Boston setting up a crew. And so I wonder if my grandfather actually was either involved with that or went up there to try to be involved with it.
Wow.
And then then I only a few years ago found out from my mother, that when my grandmother went to look for him after he'd never showed up, I said to my mom, oh, so here, I said, so she went to his friends or his associates. She goes, friends, associates? No, they were gangsters. And they told her that she'd be lucky if he wasn't at the bottom of the river. So I assume that's sadly where he might have ended up, because there's been no sign ever since. And the thing that's interesting is I think some money from the family food business may have disappeared at the time. But, my dad's family, his this was a huge stain on the family, and they never ever talked about it. The most I could get from my great aunt Lil, which is one of his siblings, is, I won't talk about it. And I always end up doing the accent. The only thing I'll tell you is they used to say about your grandfather, he'd rather earn a dishonest dime than an honest dollar. So it was like, that was like such a great line. So so I will be using it.
I love that.
Oh, and I've never figured out how to like mute sounds or turn off my phone. So if you occasionally hear a do-do-do-do, it's because I'm getting an email and I don't know how to turn it off.
It's fine. I haven't heard it at all. So it's
great.
Totally
Thank
cool.
you. Good. Yay. So that's a little of my checkered backstory.
I love it so much. Well, you have such a rich, just natural history to be able to pull from, to be able to create really cool stories. And then, I'm just impressed.
Well, one thing I will say is that the Cajun Mysteries, I really have I have to say, I love writing them. They're funny. I mean, honestly, we're always like, oh, should I say but they're funny. And they're really, I see I'm very, kind of a very visual person. And I think that's because, my career basically has been spent creating, plays and TV shows. And so I think very visually. And so I always see, I think my Cajun Country Mysteries, I kind of see as a movie playing in my head. The catering halls would be a great half-hour, single camera sitcom.
Yeah.
And, they're just pure funny and very much fun to write. And then it's like I said, when my character gets off the subway and is walking home, it's the walk I used to walk when I would go visit my nonna. And so I see exactly where she is when she goes to work. I see where she, I see the place where we got married. I see the banquet room. I see the view. And what's funny about it is, and this is true, is that the place, it's got a bucolic view of Flushing Bay, which is a terrible name for a lovely bay, but also that's where LaGuardia Airport is. So it also has a view of the landing strip at LaGuardia Airport. And what I wrote, and this was not true, is that when planes are coming in, sometimes like the building shakes or items shake. But that's actually I made that up.
I love it. You're like, it's just some creative licensing on that. It's fine.
Yes, exactly. Well, you have to use it. It's fiction.
Exactly. What was the first book that you remember loved reading?
Oh, well, let me tell you, this is like kind of an interesting story. So when I was 10, my dad was in advertising. He was a madman. Literally, he worked on Madison Avenue. I watched that show and it was literally like I was Sally. I joke that I was Sally Draper if Don Draper had been less handsome, Jewish, and monogamous. But one of my dad's coworkers gave me a copy of Little Women, and that book meant so much to me that for years after that, when someone had a friend had a girl, a daughter, or I knew a girl who turned 10, I would give her a copy of Little Women. And then about 8 years or so ago, I decided, I'm going to look up, her name was Shirley Yonover. And I said, I'm going to see if I can track her down because my parents had lost touch with her and let her know how much that book meant to me. So, I went online, and of course we hate that all our information is there, but sometimes it comes in handy. So I found Shirley and I called her out of the blue and I said, my birth name is Seidemann, and I did a brief acting stint and I changed it. I took my dad's middle name, Byron, because it was easier to pronounce and spell. Although 9 times out of 10, I'm Ellen Byron. But anyway, so I said, hey, it's Dick Seidemann's daughter. And she was like, oh, we had a little chat. I said, look, I just wanted to tell you how much this book meant to me. And she said, I thought you hated it, which was such a revelation, because what happened, and she didn't really know what was going on, is that she gave it to me during the winter break and the Christmas break between my 4th grade. We moved. And so when she gave it to me, my birthday is January 12th. So it was a birthday Christmas present, but she gave it to me during this period when I was like leaving one community, and which was a very kind of like, middle class, comfortable sidewalks. We played on the hill, and my parents moved to a town called Scarsdale for the school system. And it was like culture shock. And even though like literally they were probably 45 minutes away, it was like I might as well have been moving to another state or another country. And there were like houses behind fences and mansions and no sidewalks, and we didn't belong there. We were there for the school system, and I hadn't started at the new school yet when she gave it to me, so I didn't have any friends, and it was just like a very, very bad time in my life. But she had no way of knowing that, so I probably was just like, thanks, or and so to be able to set the record straight years later was really, really important to me. And it was a lesson I learned, and I applied another time in my life, because when I was in college at Tulane, the head of the department was a lit and crit, person. She wasn't a performance person. And, I turned in these papers and she go, you really should think about pursuing lit and crit. And I was like, oh, please, I'm going to be an actress, or whatever. And then again, I looked her, I think because of the lesson I learned from Shirley, is I looked up Dr. Berenger. I found her on Facebook, and God, this was, I don't know how many years, 5 years ago, 6, 7, I don't know, whenever. And I wrote to her and messaged her and said, just so you know, you were right. I became a writer. And so I think it's really important, when someone has influenced your life or made an impression on your life. I really learned that, like, let them know.
Yeah.
Because you never know what from their side of it. And so you can, so anyway.
That's a really great lesson just in general too, because also, and this might be it's making me think about the people who in my career who have made a huge difference.
Yeah.
And then I didn't have a chance because of sickness or space or losing touch to be able to tell them that. And like time is just so precious. And you have to tell them.
In both cases, I mean, Shirley was in her 80s and probably Dr. Berenger was the same. And in both cases, it's never too late. Yeah. It's just never too late. Anyway,
absolutely.
So that's your what is it? Your after school special moment.
Exactly.
For those who remember after school specials.
We have a question in our fresh fiction facts portion, which we'll do a little bit later, that is like, what is your motto? And I think you've already answered that for us, or your advice that you'd give us.
Oh, you know what? There ware 3 sentences. I actually do a keynote speech for 3 sentences that I really feel made a huge difference and changed my life. So I'll share them right now, so we have a little time. The first one is, which I heard in a Weight Watchers meeting, and my friend was actually the leader. And she said, do you listen or she said, are you interested or committed? And that was such a great thing, because it really made me look at all aspects of my life and where I've been interested, which apparently is weight loss, as opposed to being committed.
Which is what I do for eating.
Yeah. Yes, I'm committed to eating. I'm interested in weight loss.
Yeah.
But I'm clearly, where I've been committed is where I've made career strides and personal strides. So that was that I think you could say is a philosophy of life. Then the other thing, which this was when I was working on Wings, I was backstage, before the show filmed, actually, not taped. And one of the actresses was flitting about. And part of the flitting, she suddenly went, do you listen or do you wait to talk? And of course, then she didn't wait for my answer. She just flitted away, because that's what they sometimes do. They flit. And that was such an eye opener, because it really made me see that, especially in the writer's room, which is very competitive, I was not listening a lot. I was really waiting to talk. And I missed a lot. And I think that's been very important, especially as a writer. I'm very aware now when people are waiting to talk and not listening. And I'm very aware when I'm doing it, when I am waiting to talk and not listening. So that was a lifetime game changer. And then the third sentence, God bless. One of the celebrities I interviewed in mid to late 80s was Shirley MacLaine.
Oh,
and I went to her apartment. She at the time had what they call in New York, a duplex is different than it is in other part of the country.
Yeah, anywhere else.
Yeah, and everywhere else, it's like 2 attached apartments. In New York, it means 2-story. So she had a duplex on Sutton Place at the time, which is like, oh, I would have died for that. So anyway, I went there to interview, and 2 things happened. One, she noticed I looked pale, and she mentioned it and asked if I was okay. And I was very honest. I said, well, because I knew actors. I knew they have very few boundaries. So I said, to be honest, I have cramps. So she gave me brandy for my cramps, which
Oh,
which I still remember her handing it to me and we going, I didn't even like brandy, but it's like, well, Shirley MacLaine hands you brandy.
I
You
love
drink the
brandy.
brandy.
Yeah.
But then I said to her, we're talking about the metaphysics because she'd written out on a limb then, and she was very much into her metaphysical journey. And I said, I have a fear of flying, which is hard because I go back and forth to California a lot, for these interviews. And she said, I'm going to give you a mantra. When you feel that fear coming up, just close your eyes and say to yourself, I'm having a safe, uneventful journey. And that became it. Literally, talk about a mantra, because I've used it, of course, on the freeways in LA, because I'm, I don't like to drive. I was a New Yorker, so I was that person, laughing at people as they drove by. Oh, silly people in cars, silly people. And now I am, woo. So I use it, but I use it for everything. I use it for emotion, nerves. Like, I just say to myself, I'm having a safe, uneventful journey. And it just is such a wonderful releasing tool. So I share those with you in the hopes that you will find them as useful in your life as I found them in mine.
I have found all three of those incredibly useful, and can't wait to apply them in my life for sure.
Good. Yes. And let me tell you that I'm having a safe, uneventful journey is like such a lifesaver.
It's incredible, because I'll do something similar where I'll imagine myself already where I need to be. Yes. Or like at the end of whatever is hard for me. I'm like, I'm already there. So I just need to work backwards and get.
Well, and the other thing is, my old therapist used to say I was very guilty of catastrophic thinking, which is going to worst case scenario. And in a way, that's a safety valve. Like the other philosophy is expect the worst and you'll never be disappointed, but the safe, uneventful journey kind of undercuts that.
Yeah.
So
helps with the catastrophizing for sure.
Exactly.
Definitely a personality trait for me as well. Well, let's talk a little bit before I turn this over to our readers. I'd love to dig a little bit into Mia and into the new book, because 4 Parties and a Funeral. I love that you said it on a reality set. I want to talk about like what inspired that for you, and then also like what your experience of being a working member of the television community, like what you were able to bring to this story.
Well, it's interesting because I had to do a lot of research into how reality shows shoot, and they're shooting a pilot because I didn't want it to be an existing series.
Right.
And it came about like I was, I can't watch reality shows. I just can't. And part of it is because as someone who writes fictional, when the reality shows were starting to break in the 90s, it was really, they took up a lot of real estate and put a lot of, writers like me out of work for a while, seasons. And it's still a problem because they're cheaper to produce
and they don't have a union.
So, so I have some resentment on that score, but also I just find them really hard to watch. First of all, I hate to see when people cry. I mean, that's when their hearts are broken.
You don't enjoy watching them just like be in shambles for 12 to 18 episodes?
No, I don't. And I was like, try to watch The Bachelor, because I was like, that's kind of, the dawns of Ditmarsh Boulevard, which is the reality of the show. I could not get through an episode, but I loved reading the comments on Twitter. That was a fun part. But anyway, so it came about because I was thinking about different characters and their journeys in the series. And one is this son of the boss of all bosses, Donnie, Donaldo Boldano, and his son Donnie Jr., who's kind of at sea, and he's in his 30s, which no kids, no marriage, which an Italian family to this day is like, so I just kind of thought, oh, wouldn't it be fun to make that his journey? And so I know about craft services, that I know about, and catering on shows, because I had enough of that, so I could apply that to Mia. And then I thought, okay, well, there's this, I thought, wouldn't it be funny? I thought of all my Italian relatives, and I thought of them going to a Connecticut wedding, and because my wedding was a little different from your tradition. Even my reception in New York was a little different. I grew up with these giant Italian weddings where it's bella figura. Everyone's trying to outdo each other. I mean, I can't even begin to tell you. I wrote a whole play about one of them in my and it took place in the bathroom at one of my cousin's weddings. So I just thought putting those, and I know Connecticut. My parents had a cottage in Connecticut for a long time. And so I thought the contrast between these Italian gaffones and like the waspy Connecticut world would be really funny. And honestly, I think it really is funny. These, the guys are going up and they've got the Italian loafers and they're going on a sailboat, and, and the Italian mothers and nonnas are looking at looking at the food and going, what the hell, pardon my language, what is this? It's like, and they're listening to conversations where people are arguing about whether or not to put relish into, potato salad. And it's like, oh, this is not our world. So that was really, so, and then I thought, well, and also like, well, you know what, why not? I know New Orleans really well. There are 8 million bachelor parties or bachelorette parties. Every time you get on on the streetcar going up to St. Charles, there's like some group of girls with, sashes and who are half drunk, are like, it's a bachelorette party. So I thought, well, so there were like there are three things going on. Basically, there's like the reality show shooting, which at one point goes down to the bachelor and bachelorette parties, which are one is the girl from Connecticut who gets into a little bit of trouble there. Then there's this waspy wedding that's going on. And then there's also Mia discovers a secret Shane's been keeping from her, which could doom their relationship. And so she is determined to make, to fix that. So you have all those things going on. And then there's, 2 out of 3 of them come together at the wedding in Connecticut. So it's really, I think it kind of reads almost like you could watch it almost, it just kind of it just keeps propelling. So it was great fun to write. And I hope from what people are saying, it's a lot of fun to read too.
I love that. So when your stories come to you, is it like the characters speak to you first, or is it like you see a scene and that's what you kind of build from?
It's bits and pieces, and it's always, my protagonist is the driving force. Okay. She is the spoke of the, the hub of the wheel. And, I always keep her moving forward. And with any of my books and driving, it's close third person. It's not first person, but it almost might as well be. And, I just start, I'll get a notion of, and sometimes like for my second vintage cookbook mystery, which just came out in February, which is called Wined and Died in New Orleans. The plot for that was inspired by something I saw online, where a couple, they bought a vacation home upstate New York. And when they were doing some renovations, they found bottles of whiskey that had been hidden under the house since Prohibition. Wow. So I translated that turned into a great, catalyst for a plot in Wined and Died in New Orleans. So I'll get a notion from anywhere, but then the story, breaking the story, I outline. I call it a fluid outline, because I'll also, characters like Terry Fuoco, who's the reporter in this series. She didn't exist in the outline for the very first book, Here Comes the Body. When I was in the middle of the draft of the first book, I thought, Mia needs an antagonist. So I created Terry, and now I love her. She's so much fun to write because she's so completely comfortable with who she is. And she absolutely loves to push Mia's buttons. And it's really, writing them together is really, really fun.
I love that so much. It's fun to like kind of work those issues out with those characters.
Yes.
Well, Maria, before I turn this over to our readers, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about what readers can expect from you next and how you would like readers to stay in touch with you.
Yes. Well, thank you. Well, Wined and Died in New Orleans just came out, and that's the second vintage cookbook. And I love that it's inspired by my love of New Orleans and also my own habit of collecting vintage cookbooks. Next year, so I don't have another release until 2024, and that will be the Witless Protection Program, which will be the 5th and final catering hall mystery, and the first book in my Golden Motel Mysteries, which is a very woodsy murder. And I'm not sure yet about what I'll have in the Louisiana space, but I really love having something there, so I really want to.
Awesome. And then where can readers stay in touch with you?
Sign up for my newsletter at ellenbyron.com, because I make it as enjoyable as possible. I always throw in a little something about my own personal life, which I think is people like to have a little insight into. And I try to do contests whenever I can, like in small, sometimes it's for swag, sometimes for a book, sometimes for a friend's book. So that's ellenbyron.com. And I'm also on Facebook, Ellen Byron, Maria DiRico, author. And then I'm also on Instagram with the same.
Well, Maria DiRico, Ellen Byron, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank
And
you.
we really appreciate you taking a couple of extra questions from our readers off camera.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.